Okay. I'm going to try this again. It is my fourth time. Sorry, but it's getting a little frustrating that I can't get sound for perceiving the auditory scene. It's a little ironic, and it's same thing happened with the sound video. I don't know what's wrong with these PowerPoints that they can't take a sound recording over them, but so I'm doing this on Zoom again, and it'll just be on YouTube. So we are talking about perceiving the auditory scene and how we are basically creating these sound objects out there that are coming in from our world, and it's particularly tricky and amazing considering the fact that so if the man on the guitar is playing an A, 220 hertz, with those overtones of 440, 660, 880, and the woman singing that same A with those same harmonics, just with those frequencies at different amplitudes, and the piano player playing that same A, right? Except again, because of the different differences in timbre and the different qualities, there's those harmonics, the fundamental frequency, the lowest one, 220, and those harmonics, 440, 660, 880, and so on. They're going to each have their own amplitude, but what's happening at the basilar membrane, right, is we all are singing this A at the same time. There is simply vibration along the basilar membrane. And so if I have different amplitudes, that's not being borne out, right, as being different amplitudes necessarily, because it's all happening at the same place, those maximal places of maximal displacement, the pattern of auditory nerve firing from those inner hair cells, it's all matching each other, just with overlaid, basically, amplitudes. So how are we deciding which frequency components belong together to form each of these different separate sounds? And we went through a number of the principles of auditory grouping. So I'll go ahead and go back through them briefly. That we went through onset time, sounds starting at different times are likely to come from different sources. Location, sounds coming from different locations are likely to be coming from different sources, and sounds coming from the same location are more likely to be coming from the same source. But then I get brought up this, but hey, we can be listening to speakers, right? In which case the sound's all coming from the same location. I can't use that, right? Because it sounds all coming from the same location, but I still hear that there's a guitar, a singer, and a piano player. Another one we talked about was similarity of timbre and pitch. If the timbre and pitch are similar to each other, we're more likely to hear that as a single melody and coming from a particular instrument. If they're more different in timbre and pitch, then we are likely to do that auditory stream segregation and separate those different pitches and timbres into separate melodies. And then the final one we went over in the first video was proximity. So proximity in time, things that are closer in time, we're more likely to put those into a melody, and we're more likely to create kind of really more melodies as we are hearing these those rapid high and low notes, or those rapidly changing dissimilar. And so similarity of timbre and pitch and proximity are a little bit related. They affect each other is really how I think of them. So the last couple here, one is auditory continuity. Sounds that stay consistent or that change smoothly are often produced by the same source. And so we saw this in visual grouping, and it wasn't good continuation. It was the law of good form. I'm going to space what that's called, but I'm going to call it good continuation, that we like things that are smoothly flowing. Or actually what I'm talking about is, so if we saw the three men with they're wearing jeans, and they're being, part of that is being occluded. So there are these breaks in them, but we see it as continuing, right? In this kind of good continuation kind of way. Well, Richard Warren, so Warren and colleagues in 1972 did this study, and Richard Warren, he liked to manipulate sounds and use this particular technique, where if I'm hearing a tone burst, and so what that horizontal line is showing is that it's continuing on the same pitch contour. So do, silence, do, silence, do. People hear that as the pitch tones, but then separated by these silent gaps. We hear the silences, and that seems kind of clear. But then what he did was he took that note, that still note, again, no pitch contour, no changes, and put this noise, this broadband noise, where those silences were. So there was silence in the tone, but he put this noise usually. So that he usually used a broadband noise, which means it had lots of frequency components, and so they sounded kind of like a staticky kind of sound. And so now what people ended up hearing was do, and it continued behind. So even where those silences were, that broadband noise was there, people hear it as continuing. So having that really good continuation, even when something's being occluded. And I asked for the Gestalt principle here, but I've used good continuation quite a few times. We have this kind of continuity as if it's continuing behind that auditory occlusion, if you will. Another principle of auditory grouping is experience or familiarity. So, and he talks about this as a melody schema. So if we know a melody and we hear it, even if the notes are disjointed, if it matches a melody's notes that we know, we're going to hear it as the familiar melody. Okay, and I'm going to do this. So if I play the low E, the high D, and the low C, the high E, the low D, and the high C, and then high G down to FF and up to the higher E, and then that should be a low G up to the high F and down to the F, and then up to the E. We are playing, although it's disjointed, this song. So if we were keeping these notes together like normally how we'd hear them, and again, we don't, like I keep saying, we don't like this kind of bouncing around from low to high to low. We like for things to be close. And this is actually what we're going to see in our perception of music, that we tend to create songs where we have this proximity in the pitch space. So I'm going to sing the lower example. If you hear this, 3 blind mice, 3 blind mice, see how they run, see how they run, then you're more likely to interpret this song as 3 blind mice. And I'm going to play it, even though I'm going to tell you, this doesn't work for me. I'm going to play. It does not work for me. It did for like a second in there. So those are the bouncing around notes where it's really playing the 3 blind mice, but it's not. It's disjointed. Especially if we've just heard the melody, we're more likely, again, that does not work for me, but we're more likely to be able to recognize that. And so this is based on our experience and our familiarity. If I ask you for a Gestalt principle, and I tell you, yes, I'm not fooling you, I'm not trying to, they're not trick questions. You'll say, oh yeah, we talked about experience and familiarity for vision as well. We talked about the faces being pulled out or seeing the animals in the clouds. It's basically what cloud watching is in the visual world, right? Is creating familiar things that we know from just clouds. Okay. So those are the principles of auditory grouping. I am going to give you 2 more links in with the YouTube video of this. One will be getting you to this Mozart concerto for the flute and harp in C. I want you to, it's going to be better if you close your eyes and listen, because, so I've done this in class where I couldn't get my computer to play my music. And so we found this online. And so I know it's out there somewhere. But the thing is they're showing you the instruments. And so if you're using your eyes and you're getting the instruments, it's kind of like, it's not cheating but it kind of is. It's not the same as if you close your eyes And think about, so count how many instruments you distinguish, or you might write down the instruments that you can hear as you're listening to just about 3 minutes or so. I think I play somewhere between 3 minutes and 4 minutes in my classes, and see how many instruments you can distinguish in that. You can ask yourself how, or why, and how are you doing this? And which you probably want to go back to all of those principles of auditory grouping and kind of write them down and say, how am I using these, right? Because that's what I'm telling you. That is what we're doing. We're using those principles of auditory grouping to distinguish those instruments. And so that's going to be the first one, 3 or 4 minutes of that. And then the second one is this Kiyoshi Nagata ensemble, this Araumi, the Stormy Sea, and do the same thing. So just 3 or 4 minutes, listen to the musical piece. Again, not watching because it will show you the instruments, but so see how many instruments you can distinguish and ask yourself how am I doing this? Why can I distinguish these instruments? And you might think about if you're distinguishing more instruments in the Mozart versus the Kiyoshi Nagata ensemble, or vice versa. I usually have people who have been in the orchestra or a school band or something of that nature usually do really well with the Mozart and not as well with the Kiyoshi Nagata ensemble. I will say we usually get into, when we're talking about this, just so again you think about this one more time, it brings us nicely back to bottom up versus top down processing. When I say versus, I should say, right, they're always working together, but that we have most of those principles, most of those Gestalt principles or the principles of auditory grouping are very bottom up in the way that they would be affecting the system. So different pitch space, or, so things that are dissimilar, we're going to segregate onset time, location, all of that is bottom up information, right, coming from the world. But anytime we're saying, hey, it's because of my background, it's because of my experience, my knowledge, that these things seem familiar or not so familiar, that has a huge influence on how well we do with this. And that's a top-down kind of explanation. Okay, I'm going to stop us there. And I'm going to hope this worked this time, because I'm tired of doing the same video again and again. Share.